Hi, I'm Rick.
Hi, I'm Oscar. So Rick, we're going to do some Azure Functions today.
Yeah,
What do you have?
Developing Azure Functions. So let's straight up switch to my machine. And as you can see, I have got PowerShell open.
Okay,
Right?
PowerShell, you're in temp.
Yeah.
Now
So
what?
if I go there and I type func, which
Yeah.
is the core CLI for functions, you see that besides the cool ASCII art that the people from the Functions core tools have created, we can see that there's a lot of stuff that we can do here. We can start functions locally, we can deploy them, we can even create new ones. And
Okay,
of course that's where we want to start because we want to create new functions.
just from scratch there in your...
Right from the CLI. So let's
Really cool.
first create a BTF folder for beta talks functions.
So you create a folder first.
Yeah, because that's the location where I actually want to combine all of my functions together. So you want a location where you have your project available,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So I've got that one now, and then I want to initialize a functions app.
Okay.
So it asks me, want a .NET or Node? So we want .NET, that's the one. And then it will ask me what kind of trigger would you like as soon as I start creating a new function.
Yeah, because it's a project.
Yeah, the project's there, the CS project is there,
Yeah.
but I haven't added any functions yet.
Just
This
like
is
in Visual Studio,
yeah.
create it and then go to the next steps,
True.
actually adding a function.
So this
Cool.
is, the first step is actually initializing the folder to be the folder that holds
To be
your
a project. Yeah.
Azure function, and now I'm going to create an actual function, and then it asks me, just like in Visual Studio, what kind of trigger would you like to use? So for this one, I'm going to use the HTTP trigger, give it a really random name. The function was created
So it's
successfully.
created a function file now.
Yeah,
Can you show me a listing?
I could show you a listing. So you have the CS project, same name as the project or the folder that you created the project in. It has host.json and local settings for your host setup and your settings setup. And then it has the CS file that actually holds the function.
Okay. Oh, no magic there still.
No, so if we open this in Visual Studio Code, there's the CS,
Just like you expect.
there's the code, and it actually already has everything you need to run this thing locally, straight up.
This looks exactly the same as I would do it in Visual Studio, the project setup.
It
Is
is.
it?
It is
It's
exactly
also
the same.
compatible, so you can also switch to Studio from it.
Yeah, in the
Really
next
cool.
in the next demo, I'll switch over to Visual Studio, and you'll see it'll just run fine.
Okay, really cool.
Yeah. So what do you got?
Oh, I also got something cool. Look at this. I talked to you about last time about the dependency injection.
Yeah, which
And
is finally GA, right?
It's finally that. So 1.0, it's GA, it's supported, it has some docs around it. There's some examples on the site I showed you last time. And I actually want to show something that's in my GitHub right now, so you can also pick it up and play with it.
Cool.
So dependency injection. I have a functions project here, just like you just created from command line. I didn't know that existed. And there's a function file in here, like you have with your functions, and there's an HTTP trigger in there. What I actually added is two things. First, I added one of the dependencies in there. That's Microsoft Azure Functions extensions. It's a NuGet package, and it helps you with some extensions to set up the dependency injection.
Okay, cool.
So what you create is a startup file. You can call it whatever you want, but startup makes sense in my world.
It's the same as we have in ASP.NET, right?
That's why it makes sense in my world. So what you do is a couple of things. First, you create a binding to this class you created, because it needs to find, the runtime needs to find a place where it can discover this setup.
Yep.
Then you get a class, and it needs to inherit from functions startup. So that's the thing from that package. And what you then do is override the configure method in there, and it's throwing in a builder for you. That's the iFunctions builder.
Yep.
Almost similar to the WebJobs builder and stuff we know. So it's cool because builder has services, and if I hover over this, you can see it's the iService collection. You know that, right?
Just as in ASP.NET Core.
Just as in ASP.NET Core. So you actually can do all the same things as you can do there. You can add scoped, you can add transient or a singleton classes. to work with your dependency injection.
And the life cycles of the scopes are the same as in ASP.NET Core?
Yeah, they're the same, but this is a different environment where your functions are triggered differently. Also, if your function gets triggered, the class around it, and I'm going to show you actually, because I'm going into the function, and here's a function with a binding for HTTP and everything you know, but it's missing a keyword.
Yeah, why? There's no static there.
Yeah, it's missing a static keyword because this injection happens on the constructor. So around the function you create, the class actually does something now. It used to be a hollow thing, just a placeholder to have the static functions in there. But now it actually on each call instantiates an example function instance at this moment. That means then on each setup of this class, you get the injection on the constructor. In this case, you see, I did a couple of things. I got HTTP factory in there to use the HTTP client.
So no more static HTTP client because you run out of ports if you don't.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like there are two things. Sometimes you dispose HTTP clients because you have them in scope. Well, you will run into some problems on scale.
True.
Pretty quick, especially in functions because they're really lightweight plans. But if you have a static, you can make a static or a singleton from HTTP client, but it has problems. For instance, DNS doesn't get refreshed.
Yeah.
So that's why they created the HTTP client factory, so you don't worry about that. You can have named clients in there so you can manage them a bit. But in this case, you set up the client factory, and in your execution, you just ask for a client. You say, great client, and he will give you one that's managed for you. So that's really good. You can use that.
Yeah.
What you can also see in here is iConfiguration. That's injected from, I didn't do that in startup. That's injected from the platform. So you will get iConfiguration, which we know. You can get value from that. In this example is also doing that. It's actually getting the value here called test URL. That's in my local settings. So it's also just using the values setup. It's this one. That's out of the box. But we have something different. That's the options pattern. Mm-hmm. And I struggled a bit to get that working, but it works. So from here, the injection with the options pattern to have more complex, nice configs with also default values. I created this class, the example settings config. It's in here. It has some default, so if you read this, then your config didn't get picked up. But the setup is actually a bit different than I'm used to. Normally you just say, well, look at that section or whatever. But the iConfiguration is not available here, and if you just add the options at this moment, it won't read it. It will ignore it. So I actually have the binding here set up manually. So you do .configure and then the binding, because it gives you the section it wants to inject, and it actually gives you the iConfiguration because that's this. And then you can say what it needs to pick up to set up that object.
Cool.
So in the end, if you look at, I'm going to open the function again. If you look at this function, like I'm logging the settings from the object and just directly from the configuration, doing an HTTP call, discarding the result because I really don't care for an example. This thing works. So this thing is in GitHub at my repo. Also linked to the serverless library that's in there. Cool. Because if you find configuration, dependency injection, Azure Functions, it's in there tied to a sample. So it's really simple to get there. It's out there, and if you need injection or you want a running example and not just a piece of code which you need to figure out,
you can find it there, right?
What you promised. This works. One note. In the local settings, because we're used to the app settings from this model, and you can make, especially for the options pattern, you can make complexer,
stuff, right?
The nested stuff. But in the values list, you cannot add less nested stuff because your function just will not read anymore.
Okay.
Also, the other configuration that's in there will not be there because of that. So what you actually do is the same format you use as in your app setting, your slot settings in app service plans, for instance. You use the colon in there. Cool. So, that's one it took me a couple of minutes to find what the problem there was. But that was the gotcha there. And this is running example. I put some breakpoints in there to see how the lifetime works, how it gets injected. So
okay, so there's something else I want to show you.
Yeah.
And that's triggers and bindings.
Okay, cool.
So we know a trigger is when your function runs, right? So
Yeah.
we have HTTP triggers if it's an HTTP request, or we have blob triggers if
Yeah.
somebody uploads something.
It is the trigger for your function,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And it
So-
brings some data, right? It
Yeah,
brings some data in.
Yeah, it's the data, it's the starting point, and it gives you data. So for instance, if you look at the highlighted line on my machine right now, it explicitly says blob trigger. So in the upload container, when the blob is placed, you get the blob here assigned to a stream, and you can talk directly to it.
So you don't have to think, like the event is there and the data is there. So if someone drags in a blob, your event will trigger,
Yes.
and you have a stream in this case.
Yes.
So it's-
And that's the thing we know and love about functions, that they're triggered and that we have all types of triggers.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is we also have output bindings. So if you look at this one right here, it says, give me a blob in the copied container with the same name as the one that was uploaded. And I would like to have write access to that thing, map it to a stream, and I can talk directly to it. So
it already created the instance in the blob and creates you the stream. You can just write in it.
yes. So what I do have to say, it already creates it as soon as you run the function. So what we tried to do was have two output bindings and then
Mhm.
determine based on the contents of the file where we needed to go. Then we get two output blobs, but only one just contains the content.
Okay.
So you have to be sure
But
about
it's
that
a
one.
really, really simple way to just
Very
copy.
powerful, right? I'm copying a file over into a new container and I only have literally one line of code and some configuration.
There's no setup in a way whatsoever.
No.
Really good.
And then as far as I'm concerned, it gets even better because what you can see right here is again, the same type of blob trigger, different container, but the ID is the same. But then the output binding right here is a service bus binding.
Mm-hmm.
So this binding gives me access to a queue called process. And because I have an I collector here, every time I call add on that I collector, which is here, it automatically adds a message to the service bus queue.
Just pushes a message.
I don't do anything else but this, and I push messages on the queue for each word that's in the blob that was also automatically added through a trigger binding.
It's so good. So simple.
Yeah, so functions and serverless, but functions in particular, it abstracts away the servers that you want to use because you just say, here's my code and run it. The bindings and the triggers, they actually abstract away the resources you're talking to. So if
The
it's,
setup,
Yeah.
all the stuff.
you don't have to create a cloud storage account or a cloud blob client or anything. It's just there and it works.
Okay. Really cool. And there's a large library, right?
Yeah, it is. It's the serverless community library. Or you mean the
No,
triggers and
the
the bindings?
kind of bindings you can
Yeah,
have.
there's lots of them. It's queues and
And
blobs.
what, let's say you have something really specific for your company. Can you also create bindings yourself?
Yeah, it's completely extendable.
It's
So you can
extendable.
create your own binding and, for instance, have a function write straight into your proprietary software
Yeah,
that you
some
have running.
device which we don't know of because otherwise if
Yeah,
everyone knew it, it was probably already in the library.
true. The one really cool is you even have an output binding for SendGrid. So you just talk to the object that you have in the binding and it automatically sends an email through SendGrid
It's just
integration that you
also
have.
just add the message and it will go.
And it goes.
I love that stuff. It
So-
really focuses you on the code you need to write and not the code that needs to be there.
Adding business value, right?
There we go again.
No plumbing, just adding business value.
Really good.
So next time we'll dive in just a little bit deeper. For now, thanks for watching. See you soon.
See you soon.